Hello, and welcome to the Empower Divorce Summit. My name is Heather Debraseni, and I will be your host throughout this event. Today we are joined by Julie Ross. Julie is the Executive Director of Parenting Horizons, which is an organization that is devoted to enriching children's lives through parent and teacher education. Julie holds a master's degree in psychology from New York University, and she is also the author of several incredible books, including a book that I highly recommend, Joint Custody with the Jerk, Raising a Child with an Uncooperative Ex. Thanks for joining us today, Julie.
Thank you so much, Heather. It's nice to be here.
It is. It's really great. I'm excited about this event, and I think what I want to do is start talking about Joint Custody with a Jerk because it is such an amazing resource. While reading Joint Custody with a Jerk, I discovered ways in which I was unintentionally being the jerk in my relationship with my former spouse. Can you tell us how a parent can recognize when they are being uncooperative, in being the uncooperative ex in their divorce?
Sure. I mean, I want to preface this by saying I think it can be very difficult to ascertain when you're being the jerk because obviously in a contentious divorce, your feelings are going to be very, very intense, and they're going to color the situation. And in that case, you're more apt to place blame rather than accept responsibility. So it's important, I think, for people to understand that recognition of their role as the potential uncooperative ex isn't something that's likely to come immediately. It's rather something that develops. And I like to think about it being akin to a dance that you're doing with a partner. So, and it's a slow dance because you're close up, right? So it's a slow dance, and let's say you're an excellent dancer. Let's say, you used to be a professional dancer. Let's say you're the best dancer in the world, right? And you're in this dance, and your toes keep getting stepped on, right? And so the initial reaction to that is that the other person is doing something wrong because your toes are getting stepped on. And while that's true in a sense, the reality is that if you keep dancing, if you keep engaging in the same type of communication, then it's likely that you're contributing to the problem rather than the solution. And if you're contributing to the problem, that generally places you under the title of uncooperative yourself. So I think the first step, if we want to talk techniques, and as you know from reading the book, I'm very technique-oriented. I think that's really critical, especially in difficult situations, because divorce is not let's go with the flow, skipping down the street sort of situation. It's really, you have to be a little bit more precise about it. So I think the first step in terms of developing your awareness of what your role is in the types of communications and conflicts that are occurring lies in being able to identify what your feelings are and breaking it down even from the kind of umbrella feeling of I'm angry, right, to I'm disappointed or I'm overwhelmed or I'm worried, or I'm anxious. And then once you have a handle on that, taking responsibility for your own feelings. So I feel angry, not my ex makes me angry. So, and that really is the difference between what we call I statements and you statements. So I statements take that responsibility and accept that if we had different thoughts, we could really probably feel differently. When you say my ex makes me angry, and that's a you statement, you're more likely to look at the ex's behavior and automatically label them as the uncooperative person and yourself as the cooperative person. But some of the things that people can pay attention to, like in terms of determining signs, I would say, that determine whether or not maybe you're playing a role here. One would be if you find yourself justifying your actions. So well, yeah, I ranted about him or her on Twitter, but, you know, he or she did blank, so I had to, right? So that's a
Right.
justification. We don't really, there's no have-tos. You know, we don't have to react, even if our ex is, you know, a jerk and a half, we don't have to react by being a jerk back. So just, if you find yourself justifying your actions, you might want to say to yourself, well, what, you know, wait a minute. You know, maybe
Right.
there's something me in this, right?
Right.
You know, another would be making assumptions. So, and I think we do this all the time just in life generally. So we attribute motives without really knowing facts. And it might be something like, you know, assuming that the reason your ex wants a schedule change is because they have a new boy or girlfriend and they want to spend certain days with that person rather than the children. But, you know, the old saying, when we make assumptions, it makes an
Right.
out of you and me, right?
Uh-huh.
So we have to be aware of that. Making assumptions often means that we are not accepting, you know, we're not like looking into what's going on for us.
Right.
And therefore we're more likely to be uncooperative. You know, another and probably more obvious sign that we're being a jerk is if we engage in deliberate manipulation. So, you know, and I see this all the time. You know, sometimes a parent doesn't want to see their ex at an event that the child is invited to or participating in, and so then they lie and say that they're not going, thinking that the ex will then change their mind and they can go at the last minute, right? And
right.
That's manipulative, right? That's a deliberate manipulation. I also think, and Heather, this is something that I see just across the board in parenting in general, and it's projecting the worst. So it's like pretending that we have a crystal ball and that we know how our child is going to turn out. And it's never a positive crystal ball. I don't know why, but it's never a positive one. It's always, you know, our child's going to wind up being a drug addict under a bridge, you know, derelict, you know, sort of person or a serial
You're going to live
killer.
with me forever.
Exactly. And so, you know, when we pretend to have that crystal ball, then we have a tendency to cast blame, which is another sign that we may be being uncooperative. We have a tendency to cast blame like, well, I think my son's, you know, developing serial killer habits, and I know that my ex lets our son watch R-rated movies, and so, you know, it's his fault or her fault. And again, you know, we don't know the future. And when we assume that we do, then we're more likely to place the blame, of course, never on ourselves, but place blame on the other person. And another kind of key word, I think there's probably maybe three key words that we want to avoid. The words I have to behave this way because X, or my ex always does X, Y, or Z, or my ex never does X, Y, or Z. So
avoid absolutes.
Avoid absolutes.
Right.
Avoid absolutes, because those are going to put you in, you know, you're going to be taking the low road rather than the high road there.
Right, and we always want to take the high road.
Yes.
It's sometimes easier said than done, though.
Oh, always. I think the high road is the hard way, because the high road involves climbing a mountain.
Right.
You know, to get up to that road.
Right.
But with the children's best interests at heart, right? And I think that has to be the focus.
It does.
We have to do this for our children because they didn't ask for this to happen.
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
So that being said, what can parents do to ensure that they aren't being the quote unquote jerk in their situation with their ex?
Exactly. So I think it's more about it's about being aware of those things that we just talked about. And then it's about both adhering to a couple of little guidelines, and then using techniques. So I'll explain all of that. So the first guideline is that you want to think about your relationship with your ex as a business relationship.
Absolutely.
Right? And so what that means is, in a personal relationship, we're going to share our anger. We're going to share, we're going to say things that we would never say with a business partner. So if you think about your relationship with your ex as being, they are your business partner, and your children are the $1 million or triple, $1 million account that you have got to keep intact. So even if your business partner is being jerky, right, you're not going to let loose with expletives, because that is not going to make the business, i.e. your children, turn out okay. So business relationship. And I find that it's easier for parents to enact that principle if they script themselves.
Yes.
I'm a big believer in scripting. Most parents, when they're having these intense feelings in a high conflict or even a low conflict divorce, which even a low conflict divorce can bring up really painful feelings and experiences, historical experience. It's rarely a call to 911.
Right.
If someone's bleeding, better call 911, right?
Right.
If someone is, passed out, or if someone's having seizures, there are medical reasons why we call 911. We do not have to communicate with one another as if it's a call to 911. It's not an emergency.
Yes.
It's important. It may be urgent in terms of the time frame, but it's not an emergency. And so what that allows, if we can think in those terms, it allows us time to script. And scripting basically involves thinking about something, whatever whatever the conflict is, thinking about it ahead of time and writing down your thoughts so that you can be clear, you can be organized, and you can be concise. And you can remove the emotion from whatever the situation is. Now, some people will say, well, I'm not making it a call to 911, but my ex is making it a call to 911. And that's absolutely true. It's not always going to be you that is, being the aggressor in terms of let's communicate now. And then, so in those cases, what I suggest is that people use a technique that we call the box step of cooperative communication. So if you think of a box, on the floor, the first thing you do is you step back. So they're ranting, they're raving, they're coming at you with whatever it is.
Right.
Step back. Assess the situation. Listen first. It never, ever, ever hurts to listen. You're not going to be agreeing to anything. You're not going to be saying anything. You're just going to be listening. So that's the first step. You step back. The next step is step to the side. And that's your ex's side. This is a hard part, right? This is a hard part. But ask yourself, is there anything that you can agree on in what they're asking, what the conflict is about? Is it true that, maybe you were late a couple of times, picking up the kids? Can I agree with something? Can I at least agree on the fact that my ex is having valid feelings? Not that maybe I didn't do anything wrong, right?
Or maybe it wasn't intentional.
Or maybe it wasn't intentional, right? But they're having feelings, and the feelings are valid. So can I at least agree upon that? And then the next step 3, is to step forward. And stepping forward means presenting your ideas or your thoughts clearly and concisely, and using the I statements that we talked about before earlier,
right.
as opposed to you statements. So that might sound like, I hear how angry you are. I hear you want me to be on time, or I hear that that we had a disagreement here about X, Y, or Z. And here's where you can also present what you want. I'd like to tell you what this was like from my perspective, or I can't make a commitment to be there exactly at 4:30 on Sundays. I'd like to make it 4:45 on Sunday. So I statements can be used both to acknowledge the other person's side and to present your own side. And then step 4 is to step to the other side, to see if you can close the negotiation and think in terms of compromise. And I think, Heather, the truth of the matter is I think most of our world operates under the assumption that everything is win-lose.
Right.
And that there is no win-win. And I think the world as a whole would be better off if we could acknowledge the fact that I don't have to win, or you don't have to lose in order for me to win.
Right.
We could both win in this. It just is we're going to require that we compromise about it.
Right.
So, I think, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think that can be really hard because divorce is such an adversarial process.
It is.
You feel like, and there's so much at stake. Your children are at stake.
Absolutely.
So the stakes are super high, and so the assumption is, well, if I don't win, then that means I lose. And what does losing mean? Losing means losing my children. And, even the language, my children, because they aren't just your children.
That's exactly
They're both of your children. And so I think that it's really important to take that step back and to say, maybe I don't need to respond to this right now because what I just read made me angry. And it's okay to be angry about it, but it's not okay to take that anger and then push it back into the fight.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because we also have a saying that if you're hysterical, it's probably historical.
Right.
So, in other words, if you are furious about something your ex has said or done, it's probably rooted in history and not necessarily entirely in that moment. So that step back is critical in allowing you to kind of analyze what actually is going on here for me in this moment. I'm angry, and what is that about, right?
Right.
Well,
why am I so angry?
Why am I so angry, Or I'm not angry. I'm worried, and that's creating that anger. And, oh, gosh, I'm worried about losing the kids. Wait a minute, that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about losing the kids. So it allows us to analyze our more primal feelings, that kind of fight or flight response that we have, so that we don't come into it fighting with our fists out.
Right. Fight fair.
Right. Fight fair. And above the belt.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.